Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today, I'm a little late to this one, but we're talking about the new-ish album from Meat Beat Manifesto, Impossible Star. Meat Beat Manifesto is the musical collective originally consisting of Jack Dangers and Johnny Stevens, and going through a lot of lineup changes over the years, with Jack Dangers being the only permanent member and also clear brains of the operation. Right now it also currently includes Ben Stokes, Lynn Farmer, and Mark Pistol alongside him. Though I'm less sure about the latter two because they're not as prominently featured on the album artwork and all that. But the way some people talk about Jack Dangers, it sometimes comes off as if MBM is out to be referred to as one person despite not being one person. Kinda like Nightmares on Wax. But I'm still gonna refer to MBM as they. So I'd known about this band for a long time, but never looked into them. They're often credited by my personal favorite band, Orbital, as one of their favorite bands and a major influence. Heck, their track Remind is actually a remix of the MBM track Mindstream, hence Remind. On top of that, I hear they were also a major influence on bands and artists such as Nine Inch Nails, the Chemical Brothers, The Prodigy, among many others. I admittedly didn't know much of what I was getting into. I'd heard the original Mindstream before and was disappointed it sounded almost nothing like Orbital at the time. But that was a long time ago, and I've expanded my tastes outwards a lot more since. I'm always game to discover another piece of electronic music history, especially when it comes to UK groups active in the 90s. I've had a good track record of liking those, so without any further ado, I'm now going to go down their main studio album discography so far. I'm admittedly not 100% sure how I feel on this thing on a personal level, but I cannot deny how ahead of its time and inventive this is. Mixing elements of synth-pop, hip-hop, industrial, electro, and experimental noise, helping set the scene for the UK rave era I've always been so fascinated with. The closest comparison I can think of is maybe Cabaret Voltaire, though I don't think they have an album that contains all of those same influences in the same place like this one. And obviously I'm not huge on the noisier stuff, but that's just my personal taste, and there's some good stuff here regardless. More similar kind of stuff, though the appeal isn't as lost on me. I think this is a little more accessible than that one. So yeah, it's pretty enjoyable for what it is. I am starting to pick up on a bit of a formula with these guys, but this is probably my favorite from them up to this point. Their mix of breakbeat and new wave, while occasionally slightly reminding me of their contemporaries like Orbital and Underworld, they do still undoubtedly have their own unique sound that's a lot more raw and aggressive than either of those two, yet clearly rubbing off on them later. Underworld wasn't really a thing yet at this point. It's a fun album that gets better every time I hear it, definitely worth checking out. Okay, a 2+ hour double album spanning 28 tracks of weirdness, and I was very highly impressed. On top of that, it's also pretty ambience heavy, meaning even more up my usual alley, maybe something kind of The Orb or Future Sound of London-esque, especially in the second half, but still obviously done in MBM style all around. I don't know how to describe it, but it's pretty awesome. Nothing new for them, but still good. Kinda continuing in that same down-tempo, trip-hop, jazz direction. I've admittedly heard better in this lane, but hey, I'm always game for something like this. Also, they borrowed a sample on one track that Orbital also sampled on their own track, Oi, from the Altogether, which is interesting. Might be an intentional reference. Okay, we've reached full Ninja Tune potential, ladies and gentlemen. Some good, straight jazz breaks here. Again, always gonna be game for this kind of stuff. Not nearly as memorable or catchy as something from, say, Amon Tobin, but it's in a similar kind of lane, more freeform than him. Like a cleaner music is right at one note. So yeah, I really enjoyed this. This album has some pretty prominent dubstep elements, and like the original dubstep, not the post-Skrillex kind. It's pretty cool, but it didn't blow me away. And this is kind of the same deal as the previous album, as dubstep elements and old school acid elements, as you might be able to tell from the acronym the title forms. It's pretty left field and atonal, certainly interesting and very detailed and well produced, but didn't captivate me in the same way a lot of the earlier stuff did. Which brings us to here. I'm not gonna act like I've loved everything Dangers and Company have had to offer over the course of all these albums, but I am certainly glad I sat down with all of this stuff and fully understood MBM's place in history, now knowing full well they deserve better recognition than what they've gotten. Even if they have more than a few albums that aren't really my thing, they do always deliver on excellent production chops and forward-thinking and interesting ideas, while also sticking to a sort of sound and style that is uniquely theirs. I will definitely be holding on to Satyricon, Subliminal Sandwich, and I'll At the Center as well, if absolutely nothing else. Those were probably my personal favorites. So going into this new comeback album of sorts, I had no idea what to expect. I suppose it might take their sound into a more modern flair from tiny little previews I'd heard. And these guys have never been the type to stay in the past, but what that would entail at all, I'd had no clue. So what did we get with Impossible Star? It's kind of hard to say how I feel on this. On one hand, if you asked me to point out anything about this album that felt wrong or that I outright disliked, I wouldn't be able to say anything. It follows the typical meat beat Manifesto sound to a T and doesn't sound like the kind of thing that could have come out of any other bands or artists besides them. There aren't any tracks that irritate me, or even tracks that I feel have nothing to enjoy or respect. There's no sound that sounds out of place, no badly mixed moments, or any of that. I mean, I imagine if you're already an MBM fan watching this, you'll dig the hell out of this. But emotionally, this did next to nothing for me. Yeah, I mean, I probably got more out of it than I did the last two MBM albums, Autoimmune and Answers Come in Dreams, but I didn't exactly give those a lot of repeat listens. This one I've listened to pretty repeatedly and extensively, and again, I can't find anything wrong with it, really. I mean, at first I was inclined to say this album has the texture and detail of an early FSOL album, but the humanity of a mid-period Outer album, but that's not quite accurate in either case. It's more like the attention to detail, amount of substance as an Orbital album, but the humanity of, said, DJ Spooky's Songs of a Dead Dreamer. Again, it sounds like a really cool mix on paper, and I think it's pretty well executed as well, which is why I'm a lot more likely to be nicer to this than, say, Fortet's New Energy. But again, this is not an album that elicits any reaction out of me at all, unless I'm like really sitting up and paying close attention to it. The two problems that might lead to this reaction are, one, the fact that this is an album that doesn't really bother with traditional melody for the most part and opts for mostly atonal experimental weirdness, which again isn't necessarily a bad thing. Subliminal Sandwich had a lot of that, and I still thought that album was pretty awesome. And like I said, this album has a lot of cool ideas and creativity. If I sit up and listen to it in depth, I can definitely get more out of it. A bit more pressing, though, is the fact that Impossible Star doesn't sound like anything new for these guys. The sounds themselves and the overall vibe, for the most part, sound a little recycled from their older albums, and at the end, there's just not much here that really sticks out to me on most listens, even if there are a lot of cool ideas under the surface. Just, I guess it doesn't fit my own personal listening style very well. So let's talk about some of those cool ideas that I've been mentioning a lot. So this album, it's not a continuous mix, though I could have sworn it was for a while because it seemed to run together so much. And as I started to really sit up and pay closer attention, though, I sort of realized this is actually probably on purpose. Like, the first handful of tracks seem to just have like very, very subtle callbacks to whatever track happened to directly precede it. Be it a chord or two, a rhythmic pattern, or in the case of the track Nocebo, an actual voice clip which seems to say the word unique, leading me to not notice that I was no longer listening to the track Unique Boutique. Like, that's actually a really clever idea there. Is like building up a fake continuous mix. That's definitely interesting, I'll give him that. Another similar case is Synthesizer Test into Rejector, although that's much easier to notice example, with the latter starting out with the last second of the former, like reversed, and then kind of playing the synth pad and some effects from Synthesizer Test over a big block of fuzzed out noise. And yet there's something like oddly calming about Rejector as well that I can't quite put my finger on. I mean, I'm typically not one for that kind of, noisy style, as I've made pretty clear, but I think I liked this more than I liked Synthesizer Test, which is interesting. Possibly because it stands out a lot more easily, but I don't know. It's the kind of noise music that isn't so over the top it becomes too much for me. And again, this album isn't completely atonal either. It's just that the melodies are fairly unconventional and more designed for mood building and space filling than they are for memorability. I think they're actually pretty jazz inspired, like along the Bitches Brew lines, but just like melody-wise and not texture-wise, unfortunately. We Are Surrounded has these kind of pitched-down harp sounds or something, which I think that was what led me to the DJ Spooky comparison. It reminded me of his track, The Terran Invasion of Alpha Centauri, year 2794. And this did allow the album to grow on me more. Just the entire album definitely carries that spacey vibe pretty well. And there are just little moments here and there that keep sticking out to me as cool, like bass Playa has a good bass line, as you might expect. The title track on this thing was interesting too. It's pretty loud and percussive, but still retains that spacey atmosphere. And it has the hook of Peace, It's Impossible, which might be a very subtle jab at current events or something. And the monster 14-minute track Lurkers is actually 3 different tracks in one. They all fit together pretty naturally, but technically you could easily stick some of the other tracks from here onto this mini-series and it wouldn't feel out of place either. Still, points for ambition and execution. The tracks Nereus, Rav, and The Darkness don't sonically stand out among the other beat-centric material, but do stick out in that both are more satisfying to listen to than the other tracks on here, especially Nereus, Rav. I don't know what it is about that one, but I really like that one. And there's pure ambient material on here too, like the opener 1, and the track Liquidators, even if they aren't anything particularly interesting, and the latter especially just kind of feels like an extended interlude. There is one minor exception to the experimental and unconventional nature of this album that always consistently sticks out to me, in a good way though, and that's T.M.I. It's the only track with actual singing from who I assume to be Jack Dangers himself, and it's the closest thing to having a track on here that succeeds at being kinda catchy. What do you say? There's too much information. He's gotta go away. Not a super complex track, but I highly appreciate it being there. Yeah, so obviously I haven't said much of anything negative in my breakdown of the album on an individual track basis, and that's kind of the weird problem. I've listened to this album like 8 times, and only like 2 listens was I feeling like I was getting much of any value outside of background noise. Thankfully, one of those 2 being the most recent. It's the kind of album that's very difficult to explain why there's so little for me personally, because like all the ingredients that went into it are ones that I will typically enjoy. It's just a very perplexing and challenging listen. So because of that, I'm still probably just gonna give it my recommendation regardless. Going back to the Outtaker comparison, most of their output I have a pretty similar reaction to, like excellently constructed from a technical level, offering me plenty to talk about and praise, but just not much there for me emotionally. So, yeah, take that all as you will. I do think this is more human-sounding than Outtaker, and not nearly as mechanical. There is some warmth there in the jazz elements as well. There's a lot to recommend here, both from this album and just Meat Beat Manifesto's back catalog as well. And I'm obviously going to be more inclined towards Orbital style given how they're a lot more accessible and melodic, but I'll probably hang on to this one just by merit of me feeling like there's still something here that could possibly hook me in more yet. And I know many of you out there who are more into these kinds of styles will find much more to enjoy than I did at this moment, so I'd say in the end it's worth a shot, and I'm overall feeling a 7.3 out of 10. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.